Every episode celebrates original content written by real people who experience real emotions. I'm Rayanne Thorn Krueger. Welcome to Real Words. I have been blessed in my podcast journey to interview my guest today several times. I would like everybody to please meet my friend, William J. Wiggins. Hey, William, thank you for joining me today on Real Words.
Hey, Rayanne. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning to you. I am thrilled to have you here. First, I want to congratulate you on Humane Resources, bridging the gap between people and profit. I think I listed the title as profits, which could also be applicable, people and
Yeah.
profits.
Mm-hmm.
So I apologize for that, but thank you for
That's
joining me
fine.
today. And I would love for you to give us an introduction of yourself before we jump in.
Well, thank you. Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm William Wiggins. I am a human resources leader in Seattle. I have been in human resources for more years than I care to disclose right now. But I started my career, as you know, Rayanne, in benefits and trying to transition over to human resources. I was working for an organization that wanted me to fill in temporarily for a human resources manager, and they were interviewing for another manager at the time, and they were about to make an offer to a man who came in and said, "I just want people to do their job. I don't care about people. I care about profits." And I could not. They had offered me the job, and I had said no. But when they interviewed him and was going to offer him the job, I said yes. I'll take the
I'll
job
take the
because
job.
yes, I knew I couldn't work for that, and I didn't want the team to work for that also. So that's kind of how I
Wow.
came over to the staffing and employee engagement side of human resources.
Well, I'm sure glad you did, as are, I'm sure, the employees of that organization were probably very happy to have you at the helm instead of somebody that was just, let's keep it under budget and, again,
Yes, they twisted my
taskmaster,
arm.
right? So, so I know that you are a longtime writer, a really influential digital writer in among your group of peers and in your sphere of influence. I've enjoyed reading what you write, whether it's as simple as a Facebook post about travel or as more complicated and complex as writing about HR on LinkedIn and other forums. I know that you had a blog too, and you're an excellent storyteller. What motivated you then to write stories?
You know, Rayanne, what I was finding is I have always learned from personal experience versus reading. And I realized that when I started writing, I realized that I had a lot of stories that were sort of non clinical that could relate to human resources and the practice of human resources. And I wanted to share those stories to say this is one man's experience or this was my journey versus saying that this is the law and having approaching HR from a compliance standpoint. I found that telling a story about here is what happened, and all of the stories in my book are 100% real. I found that telling a story and relating it to how I dealt with how I achieved a certain outcome related people were able to relate to that better than me sort of just preaching or regurgitating what was already out there in terms of laws and regulations and so forth. And so that's what kind of got me. People responded well to it, and so that's how I developed that style of writing. Tell a story first and then say this is how I applied, this is what the outcome was, and this is the set of decisions that I base the my approach to the resolution.
So before we jump into the book itself, why decide to write? Why decide to write this book? Why decide to compile your stories? They were all out there, or some of them were, most of them were
Mhm.
maybe.
Mhm.
And what motivated you to compile them and put them in on paper?
What wanted me to do it, it was actually a push from the public or some readers, my friends. I would always get people to call to say, hey, you wrote an article about this, or you wrote an article about that, or I can't find that article that you did about this. You wrote it 2 years ago, and people kept nudging me to, you should write a book. You should write a book. You should put all these stories together. You should write a book. And so I thought, maybe I should write a book since everyone is nudging me to do that. So they're all in one location. Or I had people that would read some of the content because I was writing for a number of different publications, but may have missed other content somewhere else. And so I said, let me collect all of this data and put it in. I shied away from doing that because I thought when I do this, I'm going to have to take time to connect the stories versus putting it everything on paper and then shoving it in the book. But once I started that process, me having been familiar with the content and the experiences, it was a lot easier than I thought, and it was actually rewarding because a lot of the content that I had done before, I had actually forgotten details. So rereading it gave me an
Oh,
opportunity
right.
to fine tune it, or just an opportunity to kind of enjoy it, to laugh, or to cry, all over again.
Yes.
And so I find out it was cathartic for me as well because it was over a span of years, and it was good
Right.
for me to reread and kind of readjust when I was putting it
So,
together.
as a longtime digital writer, and did you upon compilation of all of these materials to make the book, did you find yourself editing and re-editing and thinking, oh, I should add this or change it, or did you feel like the stories stood well the way that you had written them originally?
I found that most of them stood well, but there was some re-editing that I did because some of the stories I had written while the situation was still going on,
Oh,
and
okay.
so I wanted to go back and say, let me change that a bit because this was the outcome of this is how that was
Oh,
ultimately
great.
resolved, and so I had to do a little bit of both. The stories actually stood, on their own, but I did have an opportunity to go back and do some re-editing and look at the situation and said, well, let me add this, or I forgot this detail, and this is really interesting. I think the some of the stories I have written, I have a couple of chapters on the political climate in the workplace and how you navigate that amongst your employees, and that has changed over time as I was writing the book, and so I was able to go back in and quickly, well, let me add this because this is happening right now, and so I wanted to make it relevant to sort of what's happening
Right.
at the time when I was actually doing the book and was about to publish it.
So it is for today. I want to talk to you about the title. So you and I both know, having worked in human resources, staffing, recruiting, employee engagement, retention for decades, you
Mm-hmm.
and I both know that there has been pushback about the title for this department over the years, right? It was
Yes.
called personnel, then it was called staffing, and then it went to talent management, and
Mm-hmm.
and uh, of course human resources seems to be the one that has stuck. You have switched up the name of that department to Humane Resources. And does that have more to do with the stories and how you have applied to life, or is it how you hope the department feels about itself?
It has more to do with the stories, actually. I What I would love is for all human resources departments to feel like they are a humane resource department. I feel that a lot of times we get bogged down in the compliance and in the regulation of human resources, and we forget that we are actually dealing with humans. And it's not perfect. It's not black and white. It doesn't always match what the book says that you should do when you are in a real situation. I always use an example of taking the guy who we were interviewing at the company that I work for, who said, I only want people to come in and do, I remember this. He said, I want people to come in and do their jobs and I want people to leave. I just want people to come in and do their jobs. And I hate that phrase. And when people say that phrase to me, I always say, it's kind of hard to come in and do your job when you are homeless, or when you are in a domestic violence situation, or when you just lost your child or your mother. And these are things that when you have people that are contributing to your bottom line 8 to 10 to 12 hours a day, you have to think about that. You cannot always say, well, oh, you're late, so you're fired. you have to take time to think about what's going on, what is happening, how can we support you, and not enough of us do that in human resources. And so the title is actually, when you read the stories, you'll see the title is actually relevant to my approach to human resources. When you're dealing with people, you have to deal with people in a humane way if you intend to get the best out of them, and that's what that's actually what it's all about. And I was working for an organization that they wanted to change the name of human resources, the department, to culture and people or something like that. And I'm like, can we just keep it human resources? Because we are a resource for the people in everything that we do. We deal with benefits, we deal with leaves, we deal with conflict resolution, and all of those are resources. We deliver resources to the people, whatever the bottom line is, be it in a medical organization, you have nurses, doctors, people that are supporting sick people to get well. We are supporting the people who are supporting that mission, and that's a resource. And so there's nothing wrong with calling it that. People these days, especially, are really, really uncomfortable with the human side of
Right.
what we do, and it's disheartening to see. And so that's where I got the title from.
I really appreciate that. Having had worked in specifically in retention and employee engagement, I loved that job and I loved interacting with employees and finding out what they needed, what challenges they were facing, and how I could help them. One thing that bothers me that I hear today, and I'd love to know your thoughts on, is, and you hear it often, is a reminder to employees that from outside sources that human resources protects the employer,
Yes.
not the employee. I would love to know how you feel about that.
Rayanne, I heard that. I used to hear that from a boss who, I remember we were having a discussion, and it was in my review. And he was saying, your job is not to be an employee advocate. Your job here is to protect the organization. And the example that I used was a very real example. Okay, so we just had a boss who was sexually harassing a woman. Should we have protected him?
Right,
Protecting
right.
the organization, to me, is calling out bad practices like that, or practices that are counter to retention, calling those out and dealing with those in whatever the outcome is. But to me, that is protecting the organization as well. But some people don't see it that way, and I ended up quitting that job probably about 3 weeks later. Um, but to me, that is also protecting the organization when you have chronic issues like that, or when you have, for example, a leader who doesn't know how to lead, and is not meeting their goals because their staff is not inspired. And so what do you do? Do we need to provide some additional training? Do we need to, do some leadership coaching and development? That's the human resources I'm talking about. It's not always about, okay, we have an employee who's having issues. Let's collaborate to see what we can do to the employee, or let's put the onus on the employee. We're all employees of the organization, and sometimes protecting the organization is going a little bit deeper, and and making sure that everyone is held accountable.
Right, right. So, bridging the gap between people and profit. What does that's your tagline for Humane Resources. Tell me where that comes from.
That comes from, I think, a lot of people think of human resources as as kind of a soft department. Nothing comes out of human resources, and I think that I actually think that started changing during COVID. But a lot of people think of human resources as one of those departments that we really don't have a connected to any financial bottom line. It is a drain, or it is an area of the company that does not create profit. But that's not true, because there is data out there that shows that when you have an engaged employee population, an organization is more profitable. When you have a more diverse population of people, an organization is more profitable. When you have competent people coming to the organization who are committed, who stay at the organization, and the organization is more profitable. Who's responsible for that? Human resources. We are responsible for it from the time that the person applies for a role that we have at an organization to the time that they actually, through the life of their employment at the organization. And so, who we bring into an organization, how we treat the individuals, how we motivate those individuals can impact an organization's bottom line and can make an organization more or less profitable. When you have an employee who is satisfied, who is engaged, and who is motivated and given the freedom to bring their ideas and their creative viewpoints to a role. And so that's, I always want to remind people that what we do, and I think during COVID, what I saw, Rayanne, is all of a sudden human resources became essential. You know,
Yeah.
I was working for a hospital system during that time, just so a really wonderful hospital system here in Seattle, and human resource became essential. And everybody, like, spread and went home, but I had the largest group. I had the clinical group of people. I was at that hospital walking the floor every day during COVID, wearing my mask, just like everyone else,
Right.
because there were things that we had to do that we had never done before. We had to implement laws, that we had to implement laws while they were actually still being written, at the state level and at the federal level, around leaves, around sick time, and it was a very difficult thing to do. And during that time, I remember thinking, oh, so now you need human resources. So now we're essential. And so I actually think that that is changing somewhat. But I believe that not enough credit is given to the role of human resources with respect to an organization's profits and what we do in terms of talent management, talent acquisition, in terms of building people and culture. All those things feed to the profitability of an organization.
Well, I just want to say anybody who is in human resources or staffing or a function that falls under the human resources umbrella, I encourage you to get um, William's book, Humane Resources: Bridging the Gap Between People and Profit. William is my guest today here on Real Words, and I love that you have done this. I mean, you are one of the voices in the industry that is, I don't know how to say this. It's loving.
Thank
It
you.
comes across with real, true, honest care. And so I appreciate that you have done this, and I hope that individuals that are looking to add that to their practice, right? If they're looking to be more for the employee, and to display that they invest in your book. And where can they get it? They can get it on Amazon, or where
Yes, it's
else?
on Amazon and it's on
Okay.
Barnes and Noble.
Perfect, perfect. And I love that Barnes and Noble has joined the online race
Yeah,
with books now. Many of my guests have shared that Barnes and Noble is where to get their book. So,
yeah.
have you always been compelled to write? Is it something that from as a child you were compelled?
Yeah, I got into writing, Rayanne, when I was a teenager. I went to a private liberal arts college that sent you away. You had to do a study. They called it a study service trimester, and you had to go away to, typically it was a third world country: Haiti, Costa Rica,
Oh wow.
Honduras, China. Belize, and a part of the program was you had to journal your experience daily. It was a part of how you were graded, on the program. Is how, in hindsight, I believe in hindsight, it was to measure your growth. And I didn't understand that at the time. I just thought, I'm writing in this journal and I gotta, write in this journal and log this stuff, that I'm doing. I didn't realize that that was a part of the program. If they told me, I didn't hear it, but I didn't realize that that was a part of the program until my mother died, and we were cleaning out the house, and I found my journals in her from that trip. I found my journals in the house, and I was sitting there on the floor, and I was reading, and I remember thinking, I had told a story about the plane landing in Haiti and it being so hot, and I was so miserable and thought, it's just a matter of time. I'm not going to make it through this program. And over time, as I'm reading these stories, that all had faded away, and I started to talk about some of my friends. We went to the beach, we did this, we did that, and when I left Haiti, I was so sad that I was leaving Haiti, and I realized, I'm like, this is what this experience, I believe, was for, is to grow an individual. And I remember my mother saying at that time, she said that, I was never a bad kid, but she said, I think when you came back from Haiti, she said you were a lot more appreciative. You were different, and so I started doing my own journaling, in other situations, just in terms of life, and I keep a journal to this day. And so that's when I developed that thing of writing and sort of documenting experiences, and it's always fun to come back to those. And
That's so
yeah.
interesting. I'm participating in a project right now called The Artist Way. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but it's a program by Julia Cameron, and one of the things that she encourages is called morning pages. And every morning you sit down in longhand, write 3 pages. It doesn't matter what it's about. You
Hmm.
just write. And I have found, and she has shared that you get rid of that stuff that gets in the way, like it's so hot here and I don't know if I'm going to make it. By
Yeah.
writing that, you were able to dismiss it and then
Yeah.
concentrate on what is really important. And that's part of what her project is dismissing those things that clog your creativity,
Yeah.
right? and
Yeah.
and get in the way. So I love that you shared that story because that fits perfectly with that project.
Mm.
What was the greatest challenge you faced in putting the book together?
The greatest challenge I face, Rayanne, is life is just, life sometimes, if you don't take the time, it doesn't afford you time to be creative or to do anything.
Right.
Sometimes you get off work and you've had so many meetings online, and it's great. All you want to do is sit on the couch and veg
Veg
out.
out.
And
Yep.
so I had to develop some different habits during that time. I wanted to do something for me, something more impactful. I didn't want to look up and, one day, and had always wanted to write a book and, document these experiences, but didn't because I was too tired. And so the challenge is actually committing to taking time to do this, and to connect those stories, to gather that content, to connect those stories, and then go through and make sure that the book flowed. And so that was the big challenge. It was a challenge to say, no, I'm not going to do that, I'm not going to do this, or no, can't stay late tonight. I got to go home. I have something else I want to do for me. And so that was the biggest challenge, is actually making time. And now that I've
Making the
made
time.
time for that, I also took up I took up painting at the time when I was also doing the writing, and it was the best thing, the two creative habits that I could have
Wow.
established, because it just it frees the mind. I don't I've tried to limit my TV intake. I don't want to sit and watch life play out, on a square box. I want to be a part of it. I want to, have those experiences, and I want to make sure that I keep the creative juices flowing. And making time for that was really challenging to do that. Either you were too tired, you were doing something for someone else, or there's just you get off work, and then you get off work, you're in your last meeting at 5:30, and now you're doing everything that you should have done during the daytime when you had 13 meetings. And so I really had to modulate that a bit, and make time, just make time, make space to do that.
Right. Right. That's really I think one of the hardest things is to
Yeah.
say I'm not going to do this, or I need to commit to this.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you sharing that. With when you think about new writers or people that are ready, they're ready to sit down and write and they have carved the time. What piece of advice could you give them?
The piece of advice that I would give is, first of all, make the commitment. Make sure that you make space in your day to do. I committed to every night doing something on this
Right.
book, and I stuck to that. And so make sure that you're ready for it. Make sure that you make the space. Don't treat it as an sort of an ad hoc project. Integrate it into your standard work if that's what you want to call it. Just like this is something that I have to do for work. This is something that I have to do for me. There was something that a coworker said a long time ago when we were living in Chicago. She said, "Never work harder on someone's job than you work on yourself." And again, I didn't
That's
understand what
great
she meant at the
advice.
time. I'm like, oh, Thelma's just crazy, and as I got out, I'm like, oh, this is what she meant. This is what she meant. And so, um, because that is work that you're doing for yourself. It's also work that you are doing for other people because other people can learn from your experiences. And so, make the time, commit to it, and stick with it. Don't kick it to the side, have it ever present. I carried, once I got all the stories, I actually printed everything out and had it bound, and I carried that binder with me in my backpack everywhere. So if I was at the beach, on a Saturday, I would pull it out. Even when I was on a plane, I would pull it out and do editing and everything. And so
Right.
make sure it's a part of your standard work or your standard day, as you would going grocery shopping or having a doctor's appointment.
Great advice. Great advice. So,
Mhm.
we are in an interesting age of technology. I mean, technology has benefited both you and I as it has allowed us to have this conversation. We've also been digital writers, right? And so technology has been really great and helpful and a supplement. But we're also facing a time where I would just want to ask you if you believe creativity might be at risk because of how invasive technology has become. Well, a recent news story is the Authors Guild has filed a lawsuit against OpenAI because they
Mhm.
are actively sharing and utilizing copyrighted material through OpenAI. Like
Mhm.
it's out there for everyone, which it is, but it's copyrighted
Yeah.
and they're not copywriting it. So are we at risk of losing I mean, are future generations facing a loss of storytelling by humans?
Ryan, and I'm all for technology, but I actually think so. I think that there has to be some, and here's what I love OpenAI for. I can go on. I was in a meeting once, and the client said we were online, and the client said, oh, I think we need a contract that says this, and we were talking about this confidentiality contract that we needed. And so I went on to open AI as we're in the meeting, found this confidentiality contract and transferred it over to a Word document, went through, did a word search, put our title in, read it over, and then I sent it in the meeting and I said, this is an example of something like this. And he was like, how did you get this so quick? This is what you have everything. And I'm like, no, 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 no. It needs to be fine tuned. I got it from OpenAI. So afterwards, I went, I read it, and put my own spin to it.
Right.
Did some editing of the document. I think it's good for that type of thing. I don't. And I see this all the time. I saw it just the other day when I received something for someone, and I'm like, they got this from OpenAI
Right.
because it's completely, you can tell they didn't do the editing, and they didn't, they just took it directly, slapped the title on it. And you can tell. So I sent it and I said, make sure you read over your stuff because a lot of the information on there, is some of it is not accurate. And I
Right.
reminded them of the story of when the lawyer cited case studies that never happened. And
That
so I
never
said, you have
happened.
to read that. But I think it's dangerous when people use that as kind of the as in terms of documents as chapter and verse, and don't bother to boilerplate. Finding something on OpenAI to get some ideas, creative ideas, is perfectly fine, or to use as boilerplate, but it nothing replaces the human mind when it comes to being creative and making sure that something, a communication resonates. I was doing I also we were implementing an HR system, and so I saw these pictures of our employees come through, and I'm looking at the pictures and I'm blowing up the pictures, and I thought, my goodness, she looks really different. She looks really different. And one of the employees had turned everyone else on to, oh, you can go, and you can get this image done of yourself, and I'm like, everybody stop! I don't even recognize you in this picture. It's like,
Yeah.
it's like you don't have hair, and we need to be able to identify our
Right.
employees,
Right.
and so I think that with some it can be a good thing, but you have to still, there's no workaround to just good old creative spirit, and and making sure that sometimes when I'm writing I use the program, um what is Rand,
Gra-
what is the program that does correction
grammar?
autocorrect?
Grammarly?
Grammarly.
Grammarly?
I use Grammarly, and I have it turned on automatically, and it clicks up and it says, "How about this?" I'm like, "No, no, that I want to say it."
No.
I'm like, "That I don't want to say that. I want to say this."
Yeah. Tell me where to put a comma. That's it. Don't tell me
Yeah, that's
anything
all I
else.
want. It's
Yeah.
like, you want to say this, and I'm like, "No, I said it the way I want to say it." So I'm getting mad at Grammarly, but
Right.
it's like,
Right.
no, I said it how I wanted to say it.
Do you have a favorite author or book?
Rand, here's my favorite book is Revolutionary Road, and I cannot think of who the author of it is right now. And
I'll
and
find
I
it right now.
yeah, and I knew that question. I'm like, my mind is drawing a blank. Um, yeah, but
Let's see.
that's my favorite book, and
Well, it's took me to the movie, which I don't know if the same. Let's
yeah,
see.
it's God, I can't think of it.
Justin Haith. Is
That's
that
it.
right? Okay.
Yes.
Good. That's good. Well, wonderful. I have a bonus question for you before we get away.
Mhm.
My guest today is William Wiggins. He has granted me the honor several times to be on the show, and I don't think I've ever asked this question of you. There is a theory called the butterfly
Oh
effect.
yeah.
I'm sure
Hmm.
you're familiar with it. It's
Hmm.
based in the fact that a butterfly, maybe on the other side of the world, flaps its wings and causes chaos to happen and changes the course of events on the other side of the world.
Hmm.
I like to apply this just to maybe simple moments in your life that caused a shift. Can you share with us a moment that was your butterfly effect that changed your life?
We've had a couple. The one that comes to mind with respect to my career is I was working for an organization. I was working on the carrier side. I was working for Blue Cross Blue Shield. And in the sales department, we, sold medical benefits to dental benefits to clients. And one of my coworkers, they got a call, and there was a client that was looking for a renewal on their medical benefits. It was urgent, and the coworker was off on leave. And the receptionist transferred the call to me, and they needed the information. They were having a meeting that day with the finance team and everything, and they needed the information right then. And so I went into the system and went to her assistant and got the information, and I went out to the client with the information and filled in for the meeting. It was during that meeting that the practice leader of the organization said, we're recruiting for a position here. Would you be interested in it? And I thought, oh, tell me more. Yes, I would be. And ended up interviewing for a job that changed the trajectory of my career. And it was that one moment because I happened to be walking by with some Danish of some sort and a Starbucks coffee when the receptionist stopped me and said, I have so and so on the phone, and they're looking for
Wow.
their renewal, and your coworker is on leave, and I don't know who to transfer this to. And I said, transfer it to my desk. And I went to my desk. And so it was that I happened to be right there as the call was going on, and it changed the trajectory of my career.
Well, thank goodness.
Yeah.
Thank goodness, because I am so happy to have our association. I am so thankful that the very kind and knowledgeable and wonderful storyteller William joined me today on Real Words. I appreciate it, William, and I would encourage again those who are in HR or staffing or recruiting to check out William's book, Humane Resources: Bridging the Gap Between People and Profit. Thank you,
Mhm.
William, for joining me today on Real Words.
Thank you, Rayanne. Always a pleasure. Thanks.
Thanks for tuning in. This episode was made possible by Never Enough Media.